Anybody ever have any problems with their Kirby that goes something like this? So I was going to do a whole house cleaning with this G3 that is currently on loan, so this isn't mine. But with this kind of problem, I figured, you know what? Let me see if I can not spend a whole lot of time on it and take care of this particular transmission adjustment issue. G3 exclusive. Go. A piece there. Date code on this is 1993. So one of the last G3s. And as you can see, this is, well, you know what? I guess that's medium dirty. I've seen much worse than that, but I've seen better than that too. Depends. For a machine this old, I don't think that's really that bad. That might not be necessary to take off, but I want to take a look at what is right down here in the bottom. That little cam gear in there is not disengaging properly, and you have that kind of clacking noise that's in there. When you engage it, it's more or less okay, but when you disengage it, you can have quite a racket. So that could be needing a replacement or just adjustment. I'm looking at it right now and it's not really that bad. Okay, so yeah, I can see this right here. All right, let me see if I can get this close here. I can see that whoever was in here last adjusted it grossly improperly, or you know what, maybe over 25 some odd years something slipped. Let's see if I can do this. This screw right here, I get a better focus on that. Yeah, it slid all the way to the inside, or you could say to the rear of the machine. And that's making this thing go crazy. So the front rear bias adjustment of the transmission is set by this screw. Oh, and look at that. It's loose. Okay, it completely came loose. Well, whatever. Normally that doesn't come loose, but in this case, it certainly did. So what we're going to do is we're going to set it in the middle. Yeah, this thing is, it's completely loose. Ooh, wow. But you know what? While I'm here, I might want to take a look and see how these little roller bearings are in here as well. So, why not? Yeah, that one's, they're both totally loose. Wow, that's really something. I mean, it's completely loose. Okay, so be that as it may, I guess that's just what that is. I haven't ever come across one, to be honest with you, that is that loose before. That's something. I mean, normally you have to really crank down on these things when you're installing it, or you really have to push very, very hard with a high torque kind of screwdriver to remove them. They basically were just about ready to fall out. That's really something. But that's just the way it goes. Now these guys are tight. Let's see if I can show you what I'm doing here. This is a little calibration plastic adjustment piece right here on the side. I'll get that out in a minute. But these are these nifty little slider blocks that have these little roller bearings in it. And I guarantee these roller bearings are definitely in need of a cleaning and lubrication. All right, so let's pull this whole adjustment block out here. All right, let's see what we got. This little plastic piece comes right out. All right. So let me make an adjustment here and get you closer. That's better with a flash. So this is the top rear end of this G3, and you can definitely see that the commutator is a little dirty. It doesn't look that bad. I'm not really hearing anything that seems awful suspicious. I might polish that while I'm in there, and I can also get to it. The top of this transmission, that's normal. I've seen much worse than that. And then here is, get right in there. There's all the transmission gears that go and attach to the foot pedal. But what I really want to concentrate on is this guy right here. Yeah, see all these little dudes here, these little 16 like little needle bearings. Let's see how close can I get that and have it focus. We're not focusing. Come on, closer. Ah, there we go. All right, that's better. So take a look at these things. There's a bunch of them. Do you notice that they are bone dry? Absolutely bone dry. So what can we do about that? And also, let's take a look at this sled here. Yeah, completely, utterly bone dry. Here's a little damping spring. This in the back. You know, the centering force, maybe is the best way to put it with the handle, with the Kirby handle. This will actually help recenter both front and rear with this particular spring. So this definitely needs to get a cleaning and a lubrication. But you know what? I'm going to do something that's going to be really controversial with this. And you'll have to go and tell me how much you either agree with it or how much you absolutely can't stand me doing that. Okay, so here comes the controversial part. You can see in all kinds of Kirby repair videos, I mean lots and lots, and I'm sure it's in the manual, to use some type of lightweight oil, whether you want to use something like this, although this is really good for like high-speed things that have a lot of pressure and temperature. Something like this, which is more common because, let's face it, this isn't really going to be that high a pressure or that high a temperature. And these things are not going to be exposed to, you know, thousands of RPMs. Obviously not. They're just little roller bearings that hold a little bit of weight, and they're not going to get particularly hot. So what I have done for all of my Kirbys, and I did this a few years ago, and I mean all of my Kirby, well, that have a tech drive, that have this kind of sled in there. What I've done is, I'm going to call it perma grease. Rather than using something like this or that will do what? It will lubricate this and these very well. It certainly will. But guess what happens over time? It dries up. And if you use oil like this, you know what happens? You will have to reapply it. Maybe once a year, once every couple years. This will dry up over a period of time because this is exposed to the air. So, see this grease right here? This is a much thicker grease, right? However, this is really meant for, say, greasing up bearings. Now, you could use something like this if you wanted to. This is definitely thicker grease, high temperature, fairly unnecessary, still fairly thin. This would be a good substitute and would last. But I got one even better than that. I have standard automotive high temperature, high pressure grease. This kind of dark red stuff right here. Really, really thick. Obviously a very high type of viscosity. Now you go, wait a minute. So going from something that's very, very lightweight, that flows very easily, okay, fine. That's kind of what Kirby recommends. Going to something that is, well, it's got its viscosity well, where it's together more. See, if you take a look at this, it is obviously something heavier, and you've seen it in other videos. Here, see, take a peek at that right there. All right, but take a look at this. All right, see this grease? This is super dense, super thick, right? Completely different properties, all three of these greases. Now, why am I bothering to blather on and on about this? Because what you've got right here would really like to have some type of grease that allows these things to spin, but they don't have to spin that fast. Also, they need to handle some kind of pressure. Okay, this red stuff right here can handle a lot of pressure, obviously. It's a car wheel bearing grease. And when I go and I grease it, say like this, right? Guess what happens? It stays there for years. These still move very easily, very nicely, right? And they have, I'm going to call this like a damping factor. Ever have a transmission that's a little nervous? So when you're running it over carpet, it kind of jerks and bucks just a little bit. Now, in some cases, they say just replace the transmission. Yes, I understand that, and I have replaced transmissions, to be sure, especially on my G6. Got a whole new transmission in it with a new gear set. But suppose you have a Kirby and it's just a little nervous. Or how about this? It's just old. You don't want to spend $100+ on a transmission. You can go and change the way that the Kirbys run back and forth by changing an equivalent damping factor of what's going on. It's response time. So something that is kind of a little shaky and a little nervous will definitely smooth out. Might not be perfect, but it's really close. And you know what's cool? You go and put it all over this sled once you clean it, obviously, get the goo out. You know what's going to be cool? You ever use your Kirby around water? I don't mean in water. I mean like, say, as a shampooer or outside or something like that, and say this gets damp. I see that all the time. If you go and have, well, of course, more specifically, I'm talking about up here. Hopefully you don't get a lot of water back there, but I've seen that too. But up here in this tray can get exposed to high humidity and high water, at least water vapor. And you know what happens? this corrodes. It does. And also it can dry out. So if I go and I cover this, once I clean it, with this dense red wheel bearing grease, all right, what is definitely not recommended, I want to be clear, you're going to do this at your own risk. It's not recommended for these bearings. It will not hurt these bearings. I've been doing this all my Kirbys for years, and guess what? Smoothes out. It literally smooths out the transmission and the handle action forward and backward. It definitely smooths it out, especially if it's a little nervous. And if it's not nervous, it just makes the whole machine gently move forward and backward. It's a wonderful motion. So I'm approaching this actually from a chemical and a physical standpoint, not an opinion standpoint. I'm not just doing it because there's just something to do. I've tried all these different greases, these different thicknesses here. This is really nice, but it doesn't help a nervous transmission, and it also needs to be redone every couple of years, some periodic amount of time. This probably would last for a while. This technically, I hate to use the term forever, but this will last a very long time. It's not going to dry up, and it's going to keep these particular little bearings from getting damaged because they will be sealed off from the air and from the water and humidity. So that's how I'm actually going to treat this particular G3. I'm going to go ahead and put this thicker grease on, so it literally should be there permanently. All right, I have cleaned, washed, lightly lubricated these with WD-40. I've checked to make sure that these slides or glides are smooth, don't have any bumps in them or anything like that. Some people use like maybe a fine sandpaper, 1000 grit, something of that nature. Whatever you want to use. Even some steel wool might work. Okay, this needs, I mean, really, it needs to be smooth. I suppose it doesn't have to be perfect, but you really want it smooth. Certainly smooth to the touch. And this had a little bit of dirt that I needed to remove. Funny thing is, I still get some questions of who does your Kirby service work, and the answer would be me. So I like repairing the machines. Okay, now this is going to be the fun part. How to get all this together and not look like a complete idiot doing it. Of course, I already know I'm going to have a bunch of thumbs downs and nasty comments about it's not in the manual and I'm an idiot and don't use this kind of grease. But I do things from a scientific and physical mechanical standpoint. I'm a performance guy, so if doing this in any way would hurt the machine, I wouldn't do it. So see, I get that completely slathered. Yep. That's right. Big, thick wheel bearing grease, just inexpensive wheel bearing grease. Wheel bearing grease does not hurt plastic, certainly doesn't hurt metal. There. So, how many years or decades do you think something like that's going to last? A long time, compared to this stuff that dries up quickly. Then you have to take it back in for service again. And that's just kind of the pits. Some service places obviously make money by getting you to come back in and pay for service. All right, there's that. Have any of you ever gotten any spring noise in here? You probably can't hear this. Yeah, there's no way you're going to be able to hear that. Sometimes I hear like a scritch, 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 scritch when this spring goes back and forth. So guess what I do? To make sure that I never get any spring noise, yep, you guessed it, wheel bearing grease. Will never hurt anything, and certainly doesn't hurt the spring or any metal parts. It's wheel bearing grease. go. That's that. You can even give a little extra right here, even though it's kind of unnecessary. I like wheel bearing grease. For anything that does not have to move quickly, right? If something's spinning at thousands of RPM, yeah, don't use that. That's not what that's for. It'll slow things down too far. All right, there we go. This guy's in here on one side. And this is the fun part, trying to juggle all of this. There we go. All right, let's get her in there. Yeah, that wasn't too bad. Hey, I didn't drop it. It didn't fly out of my hands. All right. Seriously, I've seen so many of these, and especially back here, get, well, moldy, rusty, crusty, you name it. Not real good, not real desirable at all. Now I'm only going to put these in as a general guide because I still have this little, we'll call it like a guide block or a pressure block or fine adjustment block. I need to put that in, get that adjusted. Maybe I'll spin the G3 around so you can see that just a little bit better. There, I do not want to go and crank down on this just yet. There we go. I want to make sure it's pretty loose. Yeah. All right, let's see what we got there. Oh, that's nice. So what's so cool is this is now oozing back and forth. It just has a nice, smooth movement. Really, really something. Let's see if I can make a little adjustment here. There we go. So now I'm going to put this guide block back in over here. I know you're not going to be able to see this that well, but what they use this for is to force this side over to that side and to keep this tight, but not too tight. You make it too tight, this doesn't move back and forth very well. So I don't know if you can see that, but there's a little bit of wiggle in here. It's not much. You just want to take the slack out of it. Very, very easy. This whole block has to be able to move, but you don't want it loose. So right now the top of the plastic piece is flush with this edge, with the metal edge. And usually it goes down just a little bit below that edge. I just want to take the slack out. All right, that looks pretty good. This thing is just below this little edge right here. It's just below it. Now I can go ahead and I can tighten these up. And they will actually get tightened up. I like to personally use a regular screwdriver rather than a machine to do this because I want to be able to feel and adjust the torque by hand. Yeah, I know it takes longer, and if you were a shop guy, you don't have that kind of time. I'm well aware of that. But I do this for fun, and I want to make sure that stuff is done or can be done as precisely as possible. So I'm putting a certain amount of torque on it that I know should work. So listen to that. Right? It's got good centering movement. It's got good spring back. It doesn't make a racket. And it is not loose at all side to side. Not even the tiniest bit. And that is where you want it. All right. Let me bring this over here. I'm going to check, make sure we still have a good focus. All right. Looks good. Now let's get this spring assembly on here. I've even had the springs in here make kind of a scritch, scritch kind of noise and had to actually grease them up because they got dried out, I suppose, and you had the coils of each spring next to one another just make an awful squeaking noise. You know what? How about, before I do this, how about we give the motor a little polish? Doesn't look bad, but might as well do it while we're here. Look at that. Isn't that something? I hope you could see that come clean right before your eyes. Nice copper look. And the brushes in there are not sparking a whole lot, so the carbon brushes are in pretty good shape. I didn't check the length or anything. Who knows if they're long or short, but bottom line is now that's making a good connection. And now back to our regularly scheduled program. Get the handle spring assembly reassembled. This time we'll tighten the screws down, and I'm going to start out with them in the middle. If I need to make an adjustment, that'll be fine. So we'll just take it a step at a time. So remember, there were some gaps in here, so that I'm going to say right there is in the middle. Yeah, so there's an equal amount of space front and rear. Now I've got an impact hammer, but I'm not going to use that just yet until I make sure that this is correct, because just incessantly tightening and breaking loose these screws isn't necessarily the greatest thing in the world for, well, anything. So bottom line is, there you go, and now we have equal gaps front and rear. So we're going to start out in the middle, and we will see how that works. Let's try this again, now since we made some adjustments. Transmission's in drive. Let's see what happens. All right, I think we're getting somewhere. So I'm going to do some other finer adjustments on carpet. Also realize that depending on what brush roll you put on this machine, this one right here obviously is not the right head. This has the stiff oblique brush roll in here, and that has a tremendous amount of grab or dig that tends to want to pull a machine forward a little bit. So the thing is you may want to actually adjust the front-rear balance accordingly. If you have a much easier brush, say the old, what was it, Chevron style, you know, from a G3, G4, G5, so on and so forth, it may not have the same kind of digging power, so you might not need to adjust this assembly here on top the same way you would with the brush roll that tries to normally pull the machine forward. Right, this is fine tuning time. I got a G4 head on there with the standard brush roll, Chevron brush roll, and this Entria 2 one I've taken off. So I want to see how it does actually on real medium pile carpet. Alright, I can already tell I need to make a bias adjustment. So it's still going forward a bit much. Rather than taking off, need to go and slide it around a little bit. So I'll make an adjustment and we're going to try it again. As they say, third time's a charm, and we finally struck nirvana. so let me tell you the adjustment that I came up with, and I'll show you the physical location of those screws in a minute. So this is the stiff oblique brush roll, and that's a Centria 1 head. Here is the regular chevron brush roll on a G4 head. Nice and smooth. So this is the stiff oblique brush roll from a Centria 1, and what we have with this one is a slight decrease in forward effort as opposed to backward effort. So it goes forward slightly, really slightly, with less effort than coming backward. And the original brush roll that you would normally expect to find on this is a little easier, and I mean slight, really slight, so slight vast majority of people would never notice it, but since I just tweaked this thing, I can notice it. So this standard chevron brush roll has slightly less effort to go backward than to go forward. In other words, going forward requires a tiny bit more right here. Going forward with this guy, a tiny bit less. But I just want to be clear, in no circumstance does this machine take off by itself. Even if you sit it on bare floor, doesn't go forward, doesn't go backward, that's fine. There's just small differences depending on what brush roll you happen to use. So we're finally in good shape, Thomas, so enjoy this. And now I can actually have the privilege of doing a whole house cleaning with this G3. But you know what? I think I'm probably going to use this head. I know the color scheme is definitely wrong, but it's got the brush roll that you would normally expect, the chevron brush roll in here, and I want to get the, I guess, original feeling of this particular machine, even if obviously this is a gray and this is more white. Let's take a peek here. This is what I adjusted with, this nice little number 2. This is what I'm going to crank it down with, this number 3. But see the orientation of that now? Let's see, focus, 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 focus. There we go. Yeah, definitely different than what it was before. Of course, what it was before was no adjustment. You know why? Because it was slipping around all over the place. All right, so let's get this G3 button back up again. Make it look all pretty. Nice that fit in there. That's not going to go anywhere. Let's see if I can't reorient you to get a little better view. All right. I normally like to locate my screws before I crank down on them, so I get a good even fit without any undue strain or pressure anywhere on the machine. Right. Make sure everything's seated, flush. Now I can fully crank down on these front screws. I've had these 2 rear screws crack on this particular top piece of aluminum before, so try to be as careful as I can not to put undue pressure on this metal, It can crack. It's very unusual that it happens, but it can. All right, almost there. See if we can get this little plastic cover on. All right. And let's see. I think it's this one right here. Goes in on this side. Hold the cord on. There we go. And you've got one here to hold this pedal assembly on in the back. Alright, that's good. I got this little guy that holds this little guy on. So, the handle adjustment. So let's see, this is going to go back on like this, I think. The other way, the other side. It's always good to put it on the right side, isn't it? Works better when it's on the correct side. Alright, so now you can see everything. Looks pretty good. We got a handle. We got a bag. And my brush roll of choice. Oh, come on out of there. My brush roll of choice, like I mentioned earlier, is going to be the G4, because I want to see how this machine is going to handle as close to as originally intended. So yeah, I know that doesn't match, but at least it's gray. So I'm going to leave the Centria 1 out for now. And we're going to go ahead and run the whole house cleaning with the G4 head on the G3.